Just for background and for those who may be watching, every year the department issues 1099s to individuals who receive benefits. 2020 added a level of complexity. Typically, we issue one 1099 to probably roughly between 6,000 and 8,000 people. This year, we're issuing, in some cases, 3 and 4 1099s to individuals, and the total population is about 180,000 1099s being printed and sent out, meaning there's 180,000 possibilities for a mistake or needing to even just validate data and get it out the door. And in all honesty, our teams, both on the business side in UI and on the technical side in IT, spent the better part of a month validating, correcting, rerunning, and revalidating data to make sure that the person, the claimant that was identified, and the amount of benefits we were showing that were paid to them matched up and were true and accurate. And we got to a place at the end of last week where we felt like the data that was being pulled and run out of the system was true and accurate to the best of our ability. However, it looks like what inadvertently happened somewhere along the way is the data was pulled from the system, and somewhere between pulling the correct data from the system and providing the sheet that would be used, or the document that would be used for printing and mailing the 1099s was somehow inadvertently missorted or improperly sorted, and that happened without the cells being locked in. And so, that to the best of our knowledge at this point, that is likely the explanation, although we're still conducting a review. And unfortunately, that document then made its way to the printer, and they printed and mailed the what is now the bad 1099s. And so, in terms of scope of the issue, there were 4 different sets of 1099s that went out last week and over the weekend. This included the Lost Wages Assistance Program 1099, the Vermont Short-Term Supplemental Benefit 1099, the $1,200 prepaid benefit 1099, and the PUA program benefit 1099. At this point, we believe we've narrowed it to really those in the Lost Wages Assistance Program and the Vermont Short-Term Supplemental Benefit Program is where the improper sorting happened or improper mailing happened. But I think to be on the safe side, to make it easy for people to understand next steps and our process forward, we're simply recalling all 1099s and are telling people not to use them. And we will reissue either corrected 1099s or simply validate the ones that we still have that haven't gone out yet are true and accurate. I don't think we wanted to leave it to people to have to discern which program is which and which they received and which is good and which is bad. We're just going to recall them all. At this point, it's likely roughly about 80 to 90,000 1099s out of the 100, and I think the actual official number is about 175 plus thousand that will eventually go out. And along with that, we've essentially identified three actions that have to occur over the next few weeks. And that is, immediately we have to inform individuals who received a 1099 by mail, providing them written instructions along with an envelope, prepaid, pre-stamped envelope, for them to put the wrong 1099 in and return that to the department. So that's step 1. Step 2 is identifying the population where there is the likelihood or even the potential that their social security number and name were combined together correctly but made it to the wrong individual. And so there is that possibility out there, and we need to be alerting those folks, and providing, essentially next steps for not only safeguarding themselves, but also what the department and the state is willing to do to help them through that process and cover the cost of protective services for their identity. And so that will be essentially the second step in this process. I'm assuming step one and step two will likely happen concurrently at the same time, but just for the simplicity of explanation, I've broken them into two sections. And hopefully having all of that communication go out with next steps over the next 2 weeks. Part of the issue too is it's one thing to create the communication, but then we have to identify those populations, which is a large population, and then we need to mail them all this letter and self-addressed envelope to what is a population of 80 to 90,000 people. And then a smaller population or subset of that are individuals who may have had their identity compromised in some way, shape, or form. It didn't happen in every case, but we do know that there is a population out there where their name and corresponding social were the same, but made its way to the wrong person. And then the third and final step in this process is the and corrected printing of the 1099s and the quality control measures that have to go into ensuring that the new 1099s are true and accurate, that they're printed and mailed to the right people. And there's a whole slew of other actions that happen in there, but that's really where we're at now. We are instructing people, if you receive a 1099 or a letter from the Department of Labor, because you may not know it's a 1099 just by the outside of the envelope, but if you receive a letter from the department and the name and the address do not match on the front, don't open it. Simply put it aside and you will receive instructions for how to return that to the department. If you receive a letter from the department where the name and information and address on the front is correct, and you open that and find that the information on the inside of the 1099, the name and or the social don't match the recipient, we would just ask that you put that aside in a safe place, and you will also receive instructions for how to return that 1099 to the department in the coming days. So again, kind of two different scenarios, but really wanting to focus on how do we get control of the situation, how do we return the 1099s back to the department for destruction, and then how do we reissue new 1099s? And obviously in there focusing on protecting those individuals whose identities may have been compromised.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes, Senator Ballard.
Good morning, Commissioner. I'm sure you had a long night. Thank you for being here. I just want to make sure I understood the last bit of what you said. Is it possible that what I heard being said yesterday is that all the ones that have gone out, we should either send them back, destroy them, discard them. But then you said there may be some in which the information does match the recipient. Are you saying if you open, if I go home and I open it up and it seems like it's right, I should not?
No, I would say.
I just want to make, yeah.
Yep. And I think that's a great clarifying question. So the reason about this, and this came out of the media briefing yesterday, is that there is the potential that at the same time people are receiving 1099s, there is a small subset of our population who receive their benefits through checks from the department. And so, this mismatch of data and information only happened at the 1099 level. So if they receive a letter from the department and the name and address is correct on the front of the letter, the envelope, they can open that because it may be their benefit check as well. And I don't want people to discard the benefit check. But we will be collecting all 1099s that have gone out.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
So I shudder. I have an accounting background, so I shudder to think the number of questions I have, but I'm not going to ask hardly any of them because this is so complicated. And I just trust that it's in good hands and you're taking all the necessary steps. Uh, but I do assume that the new 1099s, I've seen this before, will have the word corrected on them somewhere.
So I think, like you said, we're really early on in this process. I think we're going to review the system we have to either have it say corrected, which I think is part of that process. I think also when that mailing goes out, also making sure the envelope distinguishes that it's a tax document. And so that way it's very clear that what they're receiving is a tax document and not some other communication. And so what we are looking at are different quality control processes in the next iteration that did not exist in this one, obviously, and working through what will likely be a very clear quality control process, having it reviewed by multiple individuals, and then having it printed and mailed through a third-party vendor, which in some cases this happened, but as you can imagine, as we're trying to get 180,000 out the door, we had what is likely to have multiple hands in the pie, if you will, trying to get it going and get it out. So I think we want to streamline that process, eliminate opportunities for, missteps. And that is one way to control quality going out the door, is to streamline the process with minimal different entities having touch points into the process. So I think we'll be looking at the entire process in its entirety. And looking at ways, and I think that is one of the aspects, having it say corrected on it. The other aspect is making sure we are actually performing quality control checks on the actual documents that were printed before they ever get put in an envelope and go out the door.
I just it's really hard for, I think, legislators to get involved in this process. It's so complicated in terms of how to correct the situation at this point. The only thing I can offer is that, that we keep the recipients' needs and fears and confusion at the forefront, as well as getting this correct ultimately. So I'll just say I'm concerned when I hear that folks are being asked to do something affirmatively, like somehow mail things back, and the complications that might ensue there, and the need for that, because obviously you're going to get a significant percentage who are not going to mail things back. And I'm just concerned as to what value, like I say, it's dangerous for any of us to get involved as to the pros and cons, but I just want you to at least keep in the forefront, how confused people will be by this and being asked to do that, and, how soon some sort of written explanation, either on the internet or in mailing, and public service announcements or whatever, are going to go out to people so that they can at least minimize some confusion in their minds. That's all I can say. I mean, I'm sure there are pros and cons in the details of all of this, but just, I hope, you're consulting. I mean, I know I've done this when I was at legal aid where, there were actually laws passed that say consult with advocates for some of these folks as to how some of these notices and requests would be received. So you have that voice at the table going forward. And that's essentially all I'm going to say, and leave it to other committee members who might want to weigh in on this, and then maybe we can move on.
Mr. Chair, it's Allison. I guess, Michael, the one thing, I mean, I'd concur with our chair's comment, which is it would be great to make it as modestly burdensome on the recipient as possible. I mean, and you probably already know that, but for them to do, to be able to communicate, to email you instead of having to go to the post office and remail it or whatever, it would be wonderful to make it simpler for them, easier and less expensive, obviously, but maybe something an actionable response that isn't too burdensome is, I guess, all I would add to that.
Yeah, and maybe just let me add a little more detail just to give you some thoughts behind that. So Cameron, along with our general counsel, reached out to the Attorney General's office as required under statute. And it was the recommendation of Cameron and Dirk coming back after that meeting, to have people return the 1099. And that is because there is a series of those 1099s out there where someone else's name and social security number is on it. And so the action of having them returning it is a mitigation step in controlling to limiting to the best of our ability the exposure of a claimant's information. And so if we don't take that effort, we just compound the risk of having that information out there, either at someone else's fingertips or having it not properly disposed of, and finding its way to someone else. And so, we, like you said, Mr. Chair, we can't, we will never get 100% compliance in having people review the communication and return the 1099. But even if we had 10% compliance, that's 10% more than, of a concerted effort of returning what is potentially compromised information back to the department than having just left it out there. I'm certainly open to other ideas or thoughts that people have. We've had conversations about simply having them return the 1099 just directly to the post office and have them hold on to it. However, if it's been opened, the post office won't receive the 1099 back. And so it's likely that in many cases these were opened. So we're having to identify a mechanism for people to return those, as opposed to simply just instructing them to destroy it. And my concern would be that, not everybody has a shredder at home, or a method for effectively destroying the document. And so at this point, the best answer we could come up with in the immediacy was simply providing them the avenue for returning the document to the department.
Okay. So if there's, I guess, in offering to help and to think outside the box, if there are some particular legal requirements in terms of breaches and things to that effect, and common sense would dictate that you would do it alternatively, but the law requires you otherwise, please, as you go forward, bring those to our attention, because maybe we could change the law to make it beneficial in this circumstances for everyone. It may not be a one size fits all. So just let us know, and just keep the angst level for recipients wherever you can at a minimum is what I would suggest.
I just want to for folks who are watching, and I think you on the line know this, but for folks who are watching, just to clarify. So when we look at the total number of 1099s that have been mailed to date, it's roughly 80 to 90,000. Of those, we believe that approximately 55,000 had bad information. Even though we're asking for all of them to be returned, 55,000 of those had bad information. And then further, there is a much smaller subset of the 55,000 where we believe the actual name and corresponding social of a claimant may have inadvertently wound up in someone else's hands. So I don't want people to think that, all 80,000 that went out had bad information and that all 80,000 represent the number of people whose identities may have been compromised. There are much smaller levels and layers within that 80,000 that of the number that had incorrect information, and then a further subset and smaller subset of those that had potential compromising information.
So just one clarifying thing on the numbers. You said 180,000 originally, 175,000 1099s, but that affects about 80,000 people because some of those 80,000 have multiple 1099s. Do I have that correct?
So I wouldn't talk about people in total. So there's a bunch, there are roughly 80,000 that have been mailed to date. The rest of the 180,000, so roughly 100, were never mailed. So they still exist here at the department and won't go out. And then the 80,000 that actually did go out, 55,000 of those had bad information, and a smaller subset of the 55,000 had potential compromise.
Right. And I assume the IRS and the tax department are aware of all this and able to do whatever they need to do, because don't they get copies of these things as well?
So we haven't notified, so I shouldn't say we haven't provided incorrect 1099 information yet to the tax department or the IRS. So we actually have until the end of March to upload all that information to those entities. So we have not uploaded any incorrect 1099 information and won't upload information until we are sure that the correct 1099s have gone out. But we have notified in accordance with statute the potential for the improper data release.